Welcome. We are here today with the Tillamook County Pioneer and the Nehalem Valley Historical Society.
That's correct.
Tom Campbell. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We're here to discuss your mission and a little bit about the history. You were giving me a lovely tour, and I'd love to maybe take our listeners and viewers around to discuss some of the exhibits at the end.
Great.
But I will let you tell me a little bit about how you became a volunteer of the only museum in Manzanita, let alone the north part of this coast, unless you consider Garibaldi and Astoria.
Well, I consider all of that as a part of it. We're really just one among many. There are museums. If you start in Astoria, it's really very rich. There's
Cannon Beach too.
Cannon Beach. Seaside has its own museum.
Oh, they do? I didn't realize that.
They do. Of course, then you also have the federal facilities, Fort Clatsop is there, and I'm blanking on the other fort that's...
not Bragg.
No, not Bragg. But anyways, so there's that north of us, and then as you go south, again, you get Garibaldi. And then when you get into Tillamook, you've got a wealth of stuff. There's actually a whole Tillamook County History Alliance that is a group that just brings the whole group of Tillamook County historical agencies together.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah, the forest, there's an interpretive center in the Tillamook Forest, and the lighthouse at Cape Mears. So it's really, there's a wealth of us.
Huge network.
Yeah, it really is. It's nice.
So what made you so passionate that you decided that in your free time that you were going to run this museum?
Well, it started with Mark Beach. Mark Beach has a local history class that he does about every 18 months. And part of your tuition to Mark's classes gets you membership in the Nehalem Valley Historical Society. And so I thought it would be important for me to learn the history when I first moved here full time, and watched Mark do his classes and learned a few things. And then the meeting notice came out that said the annual meeting was going to be taking place. And I thought, I'm interested, I'll come and see. And at that point, this organization was in a little bit of turmoil, and there were a lot of open slots on the board. And I had done this kind of thing before. I had been on a board for another historical society when we lived up in the Puget Sound area. And so I thought, okay, I'll stick my toe in the water.
And they got you.
They got me. Oddly enough, Mark, for everything that he does for the Historical Society, never takes a leadership role. But when I went to my first board meeting, Mark was in attendance, and he came and said, well, I think that this place looks really tired, and we ought to do something about updating it. Who wants to be on a committee? And so I bit. And so we started having meetings about updating the exhibits, and I became the leader of that exhibits committee. And
now here you are. Are you the official director? Is that your title?
I am. I used to be the president. Our bylaws say that you can't be the president for more than 4 years. So I came up against the term limits. And I talked my friend Jay Verberg into taking over as president for a year, and he did. And then I became president again. And now I've run up against term limits again. So what we decided to do was create the position of executive director, which I could be without having to worry about the term limits. And so I'm a volunteer executive director, and I take care of day-to-day activities at the museum.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I want to save a lot of time to actually go through the exhibits, but I want to also hear your perspective about the people who come and visit. What are the visitors like?
Well, visitors come from all over the world. It's really interesting to see what kind of variety we get. And of course, Manzanita being the tourist mecca that it is, you get people from everywhere. But a lot of it is people that are local or people who have owned vacation homes in the area for forever and a day. They're fascinated with that to begin with. But we have so many other aspects to this place that I like to tell people. You can go to a lot of local museums and you can see stuff about the indigenous people and the early pioneers and the villages that popped up as a result and the development. Every place has that. But you don't go to many places that have treasure rocks and beeswax and...
why don't you just really quickly, and not do the full story because we'll do that at the end.
Yeah, sure.
Why don't you tell our listeners and viewers what this rock is here?
Well, this rock is one of many rocks that came from being on Nehalem Mountain. And there are a lot of different suspicions about how these markings came to be. But these rocks have the moniker of being the treasure rocks because there's legend that perhaps there's buried treasure up on Nehalem Mountain, and that these rocks are directional markers taking you to where the treasure would be located.
And in terms of other rocks like this, do you have any of the other treasure rocks, or is it this one here?
This is one of them, and this is in our ownership. We have another one that is known as the Measuring Rock, and that's on loan to us from the Tillamook County Pioneer Museum. And most of the rocks were recovered from off the mountain, and they were in one of our local people's front yard for a long time. And he got sick of all the tourists coming and ogling his rocks. And so he got the director of the Pioneer Museum to come and take the rocks. And so most of them are there.
Oh, that's fun.
Before we existed.
That's fun.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about how people come through the space. What are they mostly looking for? Is it the treasure rocks, or are they just kind of interested in history in general?
It varies. But, because we've got the treasure rocks and the beeswax, and a lot of times what we have are parents who are, in their 40s, and, they've got younger children. And you can tell that the children aren't going to have a whole lot of stamina for hearing about all the different things that we have. Usually it's like, hey, have you ever seen Goonies? And they're like, what? And the parents, of course, grew up with Goonies. And so they're, what? And let me show you. And, I just run them past all the other stuff and I bring them in here. And I start telling them the Indian legend about the treasure up on the mountain and the killing the slave and putting him on top of the treasure and covering it all up. And people who are treasure hunters and always been looking for it. And then I get to spin into the rest of the stuff about, here's the beeswax. And, maybe it was survivors of the Beeswax galleon that were responsible for the rocks. And then I show them the beeswax. And, oh, this is the newest find. And, it just gets them all excited. And then before you know it, there's other shipwrecks that have happened. And so, you start showing them the panel about, all the different ships that came aground on Manzanita Beach in the 1910s.
Is that unique to Manzanita? Like, is the topography here more or less dangerous, or is that just the nature of this type of ship?
Well, of course, the mouth of the Columbia is considered a graveyard itself. And so, for instance, we have a chart here that shows all of the different shipwrecks, and most of them are at the mouth of the Columbia. But for some reason, you get down to Manzanita and all of a sudden you start having a slew of other shipwrecks. And so, it's a colorful piece of history. And it's especially noteworthy, I guess, would be the best thing to say about how some of these ships ended up, shipwrecked here. Right? When you look at the iconic photo of the Glen Eslin, it comes up on the rocks on Neocani at full sail. And there's
That's this one, right? Yeah.
And there's no explanation for why that is.
Right.
There's speculation that it was an insurance fraud. There's speculation that all the crew members on board were drunk.
Oh my god!
Because it's at daylight.
They're sailors; they're always drunk.
Well,
right?
but they were behind schedule, and of course, then people speculate that there wasn't any liquor on board anymore.
Oh.
Anyways, so
they just crashed it.
They just crashed it, and oddly enough, it was insured by Lloyd's of London. It had been a recent purchase of its owner. And it was a cargo vessel. And so at that time, cargo vessels were mostly sailing under steam as opposed to as sailing vessels.
So this was like I just purchased the last internal combustion engine car when everything else went to electric. And now I need to crash it because I'm underwater literally.
I've got some buyer's remorse. Yeah. But the agent, the claims agent from Lloyd's of London, who was in the Portland office, came out and cut a check within a week.
That sounds like an insurance scam to me. I mean, not a bad one. But that's interesting. In terms of the beeswax, because I think this is the one that captures most people's hearts and attention. Why was there so much gosh dang beeswax in it?
Well, so one of the facts that I learned as I was becoming knowledgeable about the beeswax galleon is honeybees were not indigenous to North America. And so the Spanish had established a trade route, and it's on display behind me here, that went from Acapulco to Manila. And so the Spaniards who had taken Mexico by conquest were mining silver, and the Asians wanted silver as opposed to gold. I don't know why.
Easier maybe to work with?
I don't know. But they wanted silver. And so the ships would get loaded with silver and go over to Manila and trade for trade goods that were Asian and of interest or value to the Europeans. And so silks and porcelains and spices were an important thing that they could then take overland and send off to Europe. But the beeswax was important because the Spanish missions were burning candles, and the paraffin candles make a terrible mess.
They do.
And so the beeswax would be fashioned into candles, and they wouldn't have to clean the missions quite so vigorously.
And the beeswax, just for anybody who's curious, burns much slower, and then your house smells like honey.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, paraffin wax is very burning, and it smells awful, and then it's gone in like a quarter of the time. So how many people that come into the museum are already familiar with some of these wrecks? Or is it you're pretty much educating people from the very rudimentary understanding of that there were ships here? Maybe some knew that they wrecked, but...
Well, it depends on what's going on out in the rest of the world, too. So, for instance, we recently had a local man who's always been a really avid beachcomber. He found a piece of wood in a cave and was sure that it wasn't indigenous and was able to develop some body of knowledge to prove that it wasn't indigenous. He lured in the Maritime Archaeological Society that's based up in Astoria. They did some analysis of that piece of wood too. And then the pandemic happened and everything kind of slowed down. But they were able to put together a team with interest from the National Geographic and get permissions from state parks to be able to go into this cave because it's within the state park property, and go get the rest of the wood that was to be found in that cave. And so last year, their team went in and recovered the other pieces of wood that were in there And the next day, National Geographic proclaimed to the rest of the world that they'd found the Beeswax galleon. And so we had a slew of people just barging, knocking down the door. Wanting to see, what we had on that. And it was really fun. I mean, it was really fun.
People getting excited about history is definitely fun.
It's really fun. And that's part of why I get excited too, because
it's cool and you want to share it and you love it when people think it's cool.
But there's the other part of it, which is enthusiasm becomes contagious. And where, when I first walked through the door here, like I said, the group was kind of in disarray and there was a contentious mood. Well, now there's an enthusiasm. And we have the guys from the Archaeological Society coming down here frequently. We have the guy that discovered this piece of wood. He lives down in Garibaldi. And so this is a good meeting spot for all of them to come. We had some geologists in town about a month ago because they thought they knew another site where they were going to find pieces of wood from the Beeswax galleon, and they were doing underground radar to see if it was worth digging up one of our residents' front yards.
And did they find anything?
They didn't.
Yeah.
And so she's breathing a sigh of relief that my front yard's not get torn up. We had an archaeologist amongst that group. We had an archaeologist from state parks. And so there's a tree in Nehalem Bay State Park that used to be the place where you could stand and you could look and you could see pieces of the Beeswax galleon littered across the landscape. And so it's known as the witness tree. And there's some construction going on in Nehalem Bay State Park currently to provide temporary housing for the seasonal laborers. And I was concerned that the witness tree might get harmed. And so I wanted to get the archaeologist to see it and know that that's what it was and protect it. And so she did. And so she was here. Well, she also had another archaeologist along with her. And he was an interesting man, kind of curly, a little bit balding, long curly hair. And he had this device, which was like a gun, and he could shoot an X-ray through an item. Okay. And so he would put items down on the floor because he didn't want the X-rays to bounce around, but he could take the shards of porcelain that people had found, and he would put his X-ray gun on it and determine the full chemical composition.
Technology is amazing.
Oh, isn't it awesome?
It's like magic.
And
I'm just going to laser this and then tell you where it came from and what it's made of.
Well, the thing was when he could understand what it was made of, he had enough of a knowledge of Chinese porcelains that because of the chemical composition, he would know the area in China where that clay had come from.
That's amazing.
And then because he know the area of China that the clay had come from, he could give you an educated guess about which kiln or which porcelain maker had made the piece of. Yeah, exactly.
That's incredible.
Oh, yeah. So in my mind, he became mad scientist Maury.
Right? That's like a level of expertise. I just admire that level of expertise.
But when you talk about, the excitement. So we had members who have been beachcombers who had their own collections of porcelain, and they brought the collections in, and he's telling them about their porcelains, so cool. And they were just, talk about, and of course the guy that recovered the wood, he had stuff that he brought in, and there was a separate person who was from the Bureau of Land Management Lost Mines Division.
Interesting.
Okay, who was in town at the same time, and he had one of the guns too, and so we had these two guys, and so
joy.
Yeah, as a Maritime Archaeological Society guys were here. I mean, we had this whole thing going on, and so going back to the, let's get the kids interested kind of thing. So these guys are all doing all their work over at the work table as you first come in. And, I would greet the visitors coming in.
They'd immediately see the gun and go, what is that?
And so I was like, let's let these guys do what they're doing. Come on over here. I'm going to show you. And I bring them over.
You catfished them.
I catfished them. That's right. And I started telling them about Goonies.
You're going to learn something.
and so this is what it's all based on. And so here's the porcelains. You can see some porcelains over there. And this is what the guy's doing. And they're just, oh.
And then they want to go play with the gun. And
no. That was professional work going on.
I see.
No interrupting that.
I gotcha. I noticed that you have a couple of cannonballs here in the display, and I want to take our viewers around the displays, and if you can kind of describe what is in each of them, that would be wonderful.
Okay.
But we can at least start with what is right here.
Okay.
What are these cannonballs?
These cannonballs, the guy that found the wood, like I say, he's like beachcomber extraordinaire. Not that he doesn't have a full-time job. He runs a fishing boat, and he mostly harvests clams from it. But he goes up and down the beach, and he finds stuff. And sometimes he keeps it for his own collection. If he owns it, and you see it here, it's on loan from him. His name is Craig Andes. And Craig has become a very good friend of the museum. And so he's recovered these cannonballs. I don't know that they have, I don't know a story that I can tell you that's associated with them that makes them local history.
Yeah, but, they were found locally.
They were found locally, and it is evidence, and they're cannonballs. So somebody shot a cannon in an area that landed in the local vicinity. Most of this would be from Short Sands Beach.
Interesting. And can you tell if they were shot or if they were part of a larger shipwreck where they were just...
That I don't know. This is, another part of the search for the rest of the Beeswax galleon is trying to find other kind of metal that would be indicative of the galleon being here. There's so much of the galleon that just has never been recovered.
Right. And it seems like there are so many shipwrecks that we do see some part. So it is a curiosity that so much that the pieces of the ship, the beeswax and the wood and little pieces are found. It makes me wonder what happened to the rest of the ship.
Well, one of the clues that turned out to be of real consequence, because, there were pieces of it littered all over, and some of them fairly far up the bay. And, it hasn't been all that long that we've known that there was a tsunami that occurred in January of 1700. And when geologists finally came upon that conclusion, then it gave us the explanation about why is that stuff where it is.
That makes sense, actually. That the bulk of the ship was destroyed and washed in.
And so for a long time, because of the patterns in the porcelains, we were focusing on ships in this galleon trade that went missing. And there were two of them that went missing in that era. And so one sailed in 1693, the Santo Cristo de Burgos, and the other one sailed in 1703. Well, when we figured out that the tsunami occurred in 1700 and these pieces of ship were carried that far up the bay, it told us it was the Santo Cristo de Burgos.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And that really turned the key for a lot of the people that were researching what was going on there. So much so that there was an entire edition of the Oregon Historical Quarterly that was devoted to discovery of the remnants of the Beeswax galleon. And this one researcher, her name is Cameron LaFollette, really did a fabulous job because for a long time, there wasn't much cooperation from the authorities in Seville in Spain, or in Mexico City or in Madrid. I'm sorry, not Madrid, but in
the Philippines?
In the Philippines, yeah in Manila. And so she was able to get the cooperation once she said, I know it's this ship. And so that edition of the Oregon Historical Quarterly has the passenger manifest and the cargo manifest. And so we know so much more about that Beeswax galleon. There's still a lot of mystery around it because it's off course. Normally, it shouldn't be this far north.
Right.
And there's speculation that tax authorities were... The ship originally sailed, but then had to come back to port because of bad weather.
Mm.
And there was suspicion that then the Manila authorities were starting to say, well, we want to check your cargo again. And of course, there was a lot of smuggling going on at the time. And so maybe they,
Oops.
maybe they set sail a little bit hastily.
Right.
And didn't have their full complement of crew.
Right. Going a little faster than they maybe was safe.
Or maybe they didn't have their full complement of food.
Mm.
And they starved to death coming across.
That's no good.
Yeah. So we don't know. There's so much mystery around it. It's so much fun.
I think now would be a wonderful time to maybe take a quick little tour.
Okay.
But I also wanted to, before I forget, because I have a mind like a sieve sometimes, tell me a little bit about your members, and in terms of like how many members do you have? Are they mostly local? Are they kind of a mix of visitors and locals? And how does one become a member?
Well, you can go to our website. Our website is nehalemvalleyhistory.org. There's a membership form there. You can just download that. We don't take credit card online yet. So that's a part of the 21st century that hasn't caught up to us. But I'm hopeful that soon that will. We're still evolving a lot. But you can become a member that way, or you can come into the museum and get the form from us by hand. And annual membership is $15. We have doubled our membership in the past couple of years. We kind of lost track of everybody during the pandemic. It was hard to communicate with members. And so we're really proud to see that kind of enthusiasm building. I'm hopeful that I can start seeing that enthusiasm turn into not just membership, but volunteers. What we're seeing here are our charter members and some of the people that have donated to our museum to make it what it is. And we had a very generous contribution when I told one of my members about that we were working on updating the exhibits. And so that benefactor wanted to make sure that Owen and Ann Nicholson were recognized. And so here's a picture of Owen and Ann. Ann spent countless hours down here archiving the things that were our original things. And the fact that we're even in here is largely due to Owen having figured out that he could get grant money to complete this basement. The Historical Society used to be based in their basement. And the deal that he struck was, if I get the grant money to finish the basement at the Pine Grove, we're going to move the Historical Society out of my basement into your basement. What we decided to do in the layout of the museum was first to show you the map that is our area of study. Because when you talk about the Nehalem is a really long and ponderous river. And if we were going to cover all the area that the Nehalem travels, well, we'd be up in Vernonia and other places. And so we're just trying to acquaint you with the idea that there's a limit. And that map is also the map that generates or dictates what kinds of things, when people bring us artifacts, that we'll take, because we're not going to take things that are way out of the area.